Hello, this is Dylan Moore, co-host of Irita TV with Nima Majur on the line, and today we have David Cole from California with us. And David is renowned for many things, but one of the things he's very renowned for is back in the 1990s, he was labeled the greatest enemy of the Jewish people, being Jewish himself, by the Anti-Defamation League. For his work in Holocaust history, and these days he writes a column for Talkies magazine where he likes to write about race, crime, and demographic relations from Beverly Hills. So thank you, David, for taking the time to be with us today. And it's also my understanding that you have some sort of experience or relationship to Hollywood as well. Is that right?
Well, sure. I was born and raised on the west side of LA, and initially, when I was a young man, I wanted to be in the movie industry, behind the scenes, not an actor, but I wanted to be a producer. But I ended up getting in as a casting associate. So we're going back now to 1987. We're going back a very, very long time. Some of your listeners might not even have been born by then. But
I was just born.
I started in casting and eventually segued into producing. But casting, the money was very good in the 1980s in casting, so that's something that I did, and I kind of stuck with it through the 90s. You know, when I was doing the enemy of the Jewish people Holocaust stuff, however they want to phrase it, I don't consider myself an enemy of anybody, but when I was doing that, I was still working in casting because being an enemy of the Jewish people doesn't pay well. It's baffling why in Beverly Hills being the worst enemy of the Jewish people doesn't pay well. You would think, my gosh, that would be just the gold mine, but it wasn't. So I've always had one foot in the business, and then eventually I segued into being a producer all throughout, like from about 1998 until 2013, which was the time when I was outed, for lack of a better word, for my history from the early 90s of being the worst enemy of the Jewish people. So it's difficult for me to work in the business currently unless I am doing it completely behind the scenes and not using my name. And I still work in casting a couple times a year, but you'll never see my name on the screen for that, or if you do, it will be some very bizarre pseudonym because I still have a certain level of toxicity, not as
Dirk Diggler.
So yeah,
Dirk Diggler. I have a habit of taking my pseudonyms from very bad horror movies because I'm a big horror movie fan. One of my most successful pseudonyms with Desmond Bowles, and now no one would get how that could possibly be a reference to anything. I wrote for American Renaissance for my friend Jared Taylor. I wrote for him as Desmond Bowles. Now no one would get that reference. The reference is that there's an Italian actor, Ugo Bologna, who was Mr. Desmond in one zombie film, and he was Dr. Bowles in another zombie.
Yeah, that's a pretty big stretch.
Yeah, so these are pseudonyms that nobody could possibly catch on to. But I kind of like sometimes having an in-joke that where I'm the only one in the entire world who gets it.
So the reason I brought up the Hollywood thing is that in the light of Alec Baldwin shooting everybody.
Yeah.
I thought it'd be an interesting thing to talk about. But before I jump into this, I do want to emphasize the only reason that I personally know the name Baldwin, I didn't know the name Alec, I knew the name Baldwin, was because the South Park creators made fun of them in the South Park movie, like from 1999 or whatever the heck it was. I had no idea that these people existed. So, I guess that's just kind of an emphasis for me that I feel pretty detached from Hollywood and the whole movie thing, but I know it's important because they kind of run the culture. I mean, I don't know about the totality of the culture, but a large part of the culture. And I wanted to hear about how do these guys get away with what they're doing? Because, you know, Nima was also telling me a little bit about there's like special Hollywood juries and and stuff to make sure that these guys never really face the charges for like shooting people on their own sets. And I was wondering if from your experience and from what you've seen, if you could just tell us a little bit about what goes on when somebody in Hollywood really messes up.
Well, regarding Alec Baldwin, I do want to say this is one of those cases where people who might be on the right of the political spectrum sometimes reluctantly have to admit Alec Baldwin is actually a very talented actor. And in fact, he's one of the more gifted comedic actors. He actually holds the record for hosting Saturday Night Live. A couple of years ago, he surpassed Steve Martin's record. Steve Martin had been the previous record holder. Alec Baldwin is a funny guy and a very good actor. And when he came on the scene in the late 1980s, he was exceptionally popular. Now, it was like with all leading men, he gets older, and the older you get, either you go into directing like Clint Eastwood did. Clint Eastwood got to the point, once he got to a certain age, he got to a point where he started directing as well as starring in things. Alec Baldwin is producing. Now, he was producing the movie called Rust, where he shot those two people, killing one. I want to start by saying, because I being in casting, all my friends out here, for the most part, are actors. If they're not actors, they are writers or directors. But most of my lifelong friends are actors. So even though I'm not an actor myself, I know the business really well. And there's a reason that when Alec Baldwin shot those people, there's a reason that everybody on Twitter, unless they were Zoomers, unless they're very young, but everybody on Twitter immediately flashed back to the shooting of Brandon Lee in the early 1990s. Brandon Lee was the son of Bruce Lee, of course, the martial arts legend, and Brandon Lee, a handsome guy. He was mixed race, much more handsome than his dad, just in terms of international accessibility. And he was on a fast track to being a superstar, a good-looking young man, talented, with a royalty, Hollywood international filmmaking royalty behind him. So Brandon Lee was doing a movie called The Crow, which was a comic book graphic novel adaptation. And this was 93, and a terrible mistake happened on set. It was not as easily traceable in terms of fault as the Baldwin thing is, but we'll get to that in a sec. There was a little projectile that had been left in a gun barrel from previous use, something that was not visible. In other words, you could do a thorough check of the weapon, and you wouldn't necessarily be able to see this tiny little wad that was still left in the barrel. So it really wasn't not one of those things where you can say, well, my God, how did they let that happen? It was a terrible accident, but because everybody thought back to 1993 and thought back to Brandon Lee, that shows how rarely these things happen. Mm-hmm. It is actually exceptionally rare in Hollywood that a gun stunt or a prop gun usage goes wrong. When you think of all the guns that are fired in Hollywood movies, all of the gunplay that is in almost every Hollywood film, and then you realize that we have to kind of go back to 1993 to think of the last time something like this went wrong. That shows you how professional the average set is. And there's a procedure, and this is getting into the Baldwin thing now, because the procedure wasn't followed on the set of the Baldwin film. Now, the procedure is very strict. And when I talk about this being procedure, I don't mean that it's etiquette. I mean, it's a rule. It's not like take your hat off in an elevator. It's not a suggestion. These are the rules. And the rule is that any time an actor is handed a gun, whatever that gun is, that gun could be a dummy gun. In other words, it could be a rubber gun. or it could be an empty prop gun. It could be an empty real gun that is capable of live rounds, or it could be a prop gun that has blanks in it. Whatever its status, the armorer who hands the gun to the actor must display it visibly in front of the actor. Open it, show what's in the chamber, show what's in the well. And the actor must audibly say, I see this, I understand. Now, that is a rule. Again, it's not a mere suggestion. This is what you have to do. And again, this is the reason why there haven't been other tragedies since the 90s. Everything that should have been done was not done on the film, on the Baldwin film, according to what we know now. An inexperienced female armorer who had previous problems of handing the wrong gun to actors, and people had complained about that, and she herself had tweeted about how inexperienced she was, how nervous she was about being the head armorer on this film. So you have an inexperienced armorer picks up a gun that, from what we don't know 100%, but from what the scuttlebutt is, this gun may have actually had a live round in it. She picks up a gun and hands it to the assistant director, the first AD, who himself does not check it. Then he declares the gun cold. He goes, cold gun, but he doesn't show it to Baldwin.
So he doesn't check and he doesn't show it. But he
and
declares
Baldwin does not ask to see it. Again, these are the rules. The actor is required to see the demonstration in front of him and to audibly say, I have seen this. None of that was followed. So this horrible, negligent chain of events, 3 people that we know of are involved, the armorer, the assistant director, and Baldwin. None of them did any of the things that are required. As a result, you have Baldwin handed a gun that has something in it. Again, the authorities have not said 100%. The rumor is it was an actual live round, because the rumor is that some crew members were using this gun for actual target practice. Now, to put the perspective, this movie was a period piece. The movie that Baldwin was starring in and producing was set in the Old West. And apparently, again, this will all come out 100% when the trials begin. But what we know just from the rumors, this apparently was a period piece gun, an Old West style gun. And apparently it was capable of firing live rounds as well as blanks. Not all prop guns can do that. Some prop guns can only fire blanks, and you can't put a live round in them. What we're hearing is this was one of those guns that could do both, and we are hearing that some of the crew were out doing target practice.
Well, sorry to interrupt you. I just want to add to that. I mean, I work in the auction business, and we auction of prop guns, and I've never seen a single prop gun that can fire live rounds, actually. So that was one aspect of the story that was stunning to me. I didn't even know that they used live guns on movie sets.
Well, and then a question that comes to my mind as well is that, okay, let's say, I mean, first of all, if these guys go target shooting with this thing for fun, like how many laws and rules did that break? But second of all, I guess the first question answers this: why would there even be live rounds on the set to begin with if there's guns involved?
What we're getting, and again, this is all preliminary, so
right.
This is a caveat. Everything I'm saying is only based on the same media reports everybody else is seeing. What we're learning is that apparently this was an independent film. Baldwin was always, in his heyday, he would do big studio movies, Martin Scorsese films, big release movies. But now this is an independent film where he's a producer. Now that means that everyone's cutting corners. When you're doing a movie, a Marvel film, a DC film, you have all the money in the world at your disposal. 35. You ask the studio, can we have another 35 mil? And they'll say, sure, what the heck. But when you're doing an indie film, you are going to be very stingy. That is a producer's job, is to be stingy. And apparently, Baldwin and the other producers were being so stingy that a lot of the crew members were walking out. There was apparently a crew walkout in protest because they were not paying enough. More than that, they were not. They're shooting on location in New Mexico, but they're not giving the crew hotel rooms nearby. They're making the crew drive for hours and hours every single day to get back and forth. And that's something you do when you're being very stingy as a producer. You're putting the burden on the crew members. No, you drive 4 hours every morning.
That seems like a way to get really bad acting.
Well, it's a way to get.
Seems like a way to get your people shot on the set.
Oh, yeah,
exactly,
that too.
Exactly. These things don't happen in a vacuum. And Baldwin had been, and the other producers had been running that set so badly, where a lot of the more qualified crew members, the ones who are used to working in fully professional environments, they walked off just that morning, which left some of the least professional people there. And you kind of, because of your question, Dylan, about why would there even be live rounds, it's very clear that there was a little subset of very unprofessional people on that set. People who did not know the rules, or maybe knew them and thought they were unimportant to follow. But the people, there's a reason. I'm generally not a big pro-union guy. I mean, I look at some of the unions out here. I look at the teachers union, for example, and it's just so appalling. But I will say, as a man who's worked in and out of the industry for many years, the unions that represent what is known as below the line people. In Hollywood, you have above the line and below the line. Above the line means all the people whose names appear in the opening credits. Your stars, your director of photography, your producers, your director, the guy who does the music for the film. Below the line is the 300 other people who make the film happen. The grips, the gaffers, the lighting directors, the audio people, the prop masters, the armorers, the special effects guys, the stuntmen. The below the line people, their union is pretty good. I mean, it's a pretty decent union that looks out for them, but especially it looks out for making sure the rules are followed. So when you have professional below the line people who are used to a level of safety on a set, a level of consideration where you don't have to drive 4 hours every single day when the producers could just spring for a cheap motel. When they walk off, that is a bad sign. That means you're doing something wrong. Because these guys want to work. These below the line people want to, especially after over a year of the pandemic and the business being closed. All of these people want the job. They want to work. So if they're going to walk off a set, that means you're doing something pretty bad if you're the producer. So the best that we can put together from the information that's coming out so far is that Baldwin, in his capacity as producer, was so badly just lowballing everybody on that set, not paying them, not giving them the simple comforts that any professional should have. So he caused a walk-off. He was probably bringing in people who work cheap to replace those qualified people. And like that armorer, that young female armorer, the one thing you don't want in your on-set armorer is a woman who tweets, I'm
nervous.
not comfortable handling guns. Is your damn job.
Yeah.
She had one job.
Yeah, she had one job, and she didn't want to do it. So all of this, when it comes to in the months to come, as criminal or civil cases move forward, Baldwin's going to have two things to worry about. He's going to have his actions as actor, accepting a gun and not doing the required check of the gun. So that's number one. Accepting an unchecked gun and then shooting it at people. That's going to be what he's going to have to look out for as an actor. Now, as a producer, he's going to have something entirely different to have to look after. He's going to have to look out for the fact that he was calling the shots about who gets paid what, who gets treated how, who, if You're going to bring in scabs. You're going to bring in unqualified kids to do an adult's job. He's responsible as producer. So he's got these two areas where he was involved in this film that are going to potentially lead to something either criminal, certainly civil. I mean, civil goes without saying.
What about the fact that apparently the people were shot, they weren't even actors? Why would you be pointing the gun at someone who's not in the script to have a gun pointed at them?
Well, he's aiming at the camera. This was a shot where he's Dirty Harry, like Make My Day. We're getting him looking at the camera as though the camera is the person he's shooting at. So the scene called for him to fire at one of the bad guys. And of course, when you fire at the camera, who are you going to hit? If you're going to hit somebody, you're going to hit the director of photography. That was the woman who died. She's the person behind the camera. So if you're shooting at the camera, she's directly in line of fire. And she apparently took one right in the chest, and she didn't die immediately, but she died fairly soon at being rushed to the hospital. And then the director, it's unclear at the moment whether the director was, because the director usually stands behind the cinematographer. So it's unclear whether the director was hit because the bullet went through the camera woman, or whether there was some kind of shrapnel that hit him. His wounds were not life-threatening. He was released within a day. So it was the camera woman who took that bullet straight on, because that's where Baldwin was aiming. He was just aiming straight at the camera and doing it with a gun that, to pull a trigger on any gun that you have not checked while you're aiming at somebody is the most reckless thing possible. Nima, of course, who knows these matters
I know that too.
better than I do.
I was just gonna say that generally gun owners cringe when they see anti-gun people or people who don't know a lot about guns handle guns, because they tend to violate the most basic rules of gun safety within a couple of seconds when they pick up a gun. And I don't think that this would have happened to a real gun owner. So I don't know about Alec Baldwin. I don't know how much he's into shooting and whatnot, but I don't think this would have happened to somebody who's used to handling guns, or who's a gun owner, because among gun owners, it's very common. It's just automatic. You have to check every gun before you.
If somebody hands you a gun, you check it. Yeah.
You check it. You don't point it at anyone, even if you know it's empty. We're pretty paranoid about all that kind of stuff. And like, I remember, for example, Senator Feinstein in front of a crowd of Republicans with an AK or an AR-15, pointing it at the whole crowd. It's just to a gun owner, that's inconceivable to do ever under any circumstances,
unless you intend to shoot.
Unless you intend to kill, and so it's ironic that the liberals who are so concerned about guns and about the danger of guns don't follow these basic safety.
They have no idea about them. Nothing.
Right.
Well, and then just from, and maybe you guys have know differently from I, but it sounds like from what I've heard that Alec Baldwin was quite an anti-Second Amendment guy. So it would stand to reason, if that's the case, then he probably didn't know how to handle a gun very well.
Well, I don't know. What was he? Do you know anything about his gun stance, David?
No. Oh, David.
The thing is, what matters is, and this is what, once these things make their way through the courts, this is what people are going to be talking about. It doesn't necessarily matter so much how he may have felt about guns in real life, but he's been in 100 movies where he has shot guns. And so he's been in 100 movies where he knows the procedure. And that's all that these legal matters are going to come down to, is the fact that the procedure wasn't followed. Now, whether Alec Baldwin is one of these guys who is, because he is very left-wing, but whether he's one of these left-wingers who privately goes out and shoots guns and really secretly is a gun collector and he doesn't let anybody know, or whether he's one of these Woody Allen, hey, guns, they're scary with the bang and the oi. Whatever the case is, what is known is that he's done 100 movies as mob guys, as gangsters, as bank robbers, as cops. He's done 100 movies where he has shotguns on set. So the procedure is very well known to him. And a lot of this is going to come down to why the procedure was violated. Now, when you're producing an independent film, which means that you don't have the studio's mega millions behind you, and you've got private investors for the most part who are funding this thing, you are often under a lot of pressure to not go over budget. And that a lot of times leads to a desire to rush through a day's shooting, because if you lose the sunlight, this was a daytime scene they were shooting. And when you're shooting a daytime scene, you're always aware the sun is moving in the sky. And if you don't get this scene wrapped before the sun changes position and you lose your lighting, then you've lost a whole day's worth of shooting, which means you've lost millions of dollars. It could very well be that Baldwin, in his capacity as producer, was in such a hurry. Let's get through this damn scene. Come on, time is money, that he ignored all of the procedures because he was just trying to get the shot done. All of these things can count towards negligence, because the one thing that no one is even going to have to prove, the one thing that is going to be taken for granted, is that Baldwin knew what the procedures are. So we're not talking about a neophyte actor, some greenhorn, who had no idea what was supposed to be done. Baldwin knew it was supposed to be done, and he didn't do it. He will probably offer all kinds of excuses. He will offer the excuse of, we were running behind, and so we were just speeding things up. Or he might offer the excuse of he was distracted by some production budget issue and he wasn't thinking. He's going to, as these things end up coming to court, he's going to offer a whole bunch of excuses, and most of them will probably revolve around the hardships of the average independent producer on an independent shoot, because you do have a lot on your mind, because you're not just the actor, but you're in charge of the money that your investors have put into it, and you know that they will be very unforgiving if you come back to them and say, we wasted $5 million today, and we need $5 million more. Well, they're going to be very pissed off about that. So he's probably already, him and his attorneys, they're probably already working out a litany of excuses for why his mind just wasn't there that day. And that's probably what is going to play out as both criminally and civilly. And New Mexico has its own laws. I'm pretty well versed on all of these celebrity trials here in LA. New Mexico, though, there's different definitions of manslaughter and volunteer manslaughter.
Well, this makes the conversation even more interesting then, because that segues into what I wanted to get to, is that what is justice typically like for a Hollywood elite member that may run himself into something that, let's just assume it's criminal. He's facing something criminal. What would typically happen for a Hollywood elite?
Well, let me start by posing a question, see if either of you two gentlemen might get this. And I would probably put money that neither of you will, not because you are not both very, very intelligent guys. Nima is probably the most intelligent guy I've ever met. But it's just a trivial matter that you guys might not know. In all of LA history, there has only been one celebrity who has actually been convicted, not accused, but convicted of murder.
Was it Phil Spector?
Yeah, Nima never disappoints, my friend. You never disappoint. Yes, Phil
I didn't have it.
It's entirely possible that David has told me this story 10 times already. But,
Well, we do often get on these topics when we're talking. In 2012, there was a guy named Alan Jackson who was running for district attorney of LA. And his whole platform when he was running was, I'm the guy who got the conviction against Phil Spector. I'm the one man who's ever been able to get a conviction for murder against a celebrity. And that was his big calling card. And even the Phil Spector trial, there was a mistrial first. The first time they put Spector on trial, it was 10-2 to convict. But there were two people who were like, oh my God, but he's such a good musician. Oh, his music. Oh, his music. So there were two people who just were holdouts. And so the first trial was a mistrial, but then the second trial, which Jackson also presided over as prosecutor, they finally got the conviction. Other than that, it is very difficult. Now, and I've told Nima this story many times, but the most well-known example is the Twilight Zone movie, which is worse than the Baldwin thing, mainly because 3 people died and 2 of them were children. So the Twilight Zone deaths, which resulted in a major criminal trial. The Twilight Zone, of course, was a TV series from the 1950s. And then in the late 1970s, early 1980s, Steven Spielberg wanted to develop it into a movie, the Twilight Zone movie, that would be 4 different stories with 4 different directors. Spielberg would direct one segment. John Landis, who did the Blues Brothers and Trading Places and Animal House, would do another segment. George Miller, who did Mad Max, would do one, and then Joe Dante, who did a whole bunch of low-budget horror movies, would do the other one. So every director was in charge of their own segment, and Spielberg was the master producer of the whole deal. So John Landis, the guy who at that point was mainly known for Animal House and the Blues Brothers, John Landis was doing a terrible segment. I mean, it's unwatchable. It's so bad. It's about a racist. There's a guy, a white guy, and it opens up and he's in a bar. He's like, I lost my job today because of them blacks. Damn black. Oh, do I hate those blacks. Oh, I can't. I want to beat up 100 blacks. And you know what? It's not just it's the beaners too. Oh, I just want to pound them beaners and them kikes, them Jews. Oh, I'd like to shoot them all.
Just like as stereotypical as it. Yeah, got it. Uh-huh.
Yeah, as bad as it gets. And people like there's this very typical Hollywood like civilized black couple in the bar. Like, sir, could you please keep it down? Your language is rather offensive to us. Are you? You're black too, and I hate you as well. I hate all of you. And he gets drunk and he goes out, he leaves the bar. Oh, and guess what? Now he's a black guy in 1940s Mississippi. No, he's stepped into the Twilight Zone and he's getting karmic justice. So now he himself is a black guy being chased by the Klan. And when he gets away from them, oh, now he's a Jew in Nazi Germany. Oh, and now he's got to run from the Nazis. He's being taught a lesson by the Twilight Zone. And then after he escapes Nazi Germany, he finds himself as a Viet Cong during the Vietnam War being chased by American troops. Now that right there is an odd analogy, because the Vietnam War, however you feel about it, whether it was justified, whether it was a complete waste of time and life, money, either way though, it was a war with two sides. I mean, you had the North BC and the South. They were actually fighting each other legitimately. It's not quite the same as the KKK, like killing a black child, which was not legitimate combat. It was not an actual war. So, but anyway, this segment doesn't have to make sense. So now he's the racist is now an Asian man in Vietnam during the war. American troops are trying to kill him, but you see, at this point, he's redeemed himself. He's realized, oh my God, my racism was wrong this whole time. I should have been a good guy, and instead I was filled with hate. So he sees these 2 Vietnamese kids who are about to be killed by the Americans, and he runs over and he picks them up and he takes them to safety, and that's his redemption. And then he comes back to the real life, to America in the present. He's like, I'm going to change. And it's like Scrooge, basically. It's a Christmas Carol. The racist gets redeemed by finding himself in 3 different periods of time where he was the persecuted one. Now, that was what the screenplay called for. And Landis, the director, he loved explosions. He loved car crashes and big blow-ups. And he looked at the script and he said, there's not enough explosions in it. The scene where the racist goes to pick up the two Vietnamese kids and drag them to safety, I want this to be shot with explosions all over the place. Now, the rules that were violated at this point, we haven't even gotten to the deaths yet. The rules that were already being violated. This is 1982. This was a long time ago, but the rules that were already being violated were myriad. The minors, the two child actors, had been their parents were Vietnamese immigrants who didn't speak English, and they'd basically been conned. The parents had been conned into giving up their kids for this shoot, because there are rules in the business regarding minors. And there's some of the strictest rules possible. You cannot use minors around explosions for obvious reasons. You can't use a kid if you're going to set off pyrotechnics or any kind of detonation of any kind. So there can't be children around explosions. Children cannot work late at night, but Landis was shooting this in the California desert at like 2 a.m. Kids can't work those hours. There's very strict rules about when a child actor can work and when they can't. There has to be an on-set guardian along with the parents. That's a SAG rule, Screen Actors Guild rule, because they know that parents will sometimes do things just for the money. So there's got to be an objective observer on set who's looking out just for the kids. Landis and Spielberg, as the producer, hid all of that. They conned these Vietnamese immigrant parents into giving up their kids for a couple nights. They had the kids around explosions. They had no on-set observer. They had the kids working in the middle of the night. And worst of all, something Nima brought up about live ammo. Landis was actually using live ammunition. The actual Marine combat weaponry, because they wanted a scene where the American troops are just gunning down all this foliage, like gunning down trees.
And he wanted the actual trees to get gunned down.
Exactly.
Because it's as real as it's going to get. Yeah, okay.
As real as it's going to get. And so that's what they did. So now you've got kids working around live ammo. Everything about this scene is wrong. Now, Spielberg's not on set. He's the producer, but he's not there. But Landis, the director, what ends up happening is the scene where the actor, Vic Morrow, who was the father of an actress named Jennifer Jason Leigh, Vic Morrow has got the two Vietnamese kids under each arm, and he's running through the village. They made a fake Vietnamese village in the middle of the desert. He's running through the village. Explosion, bang, 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 bang. Landis, the director, is up in a helicopter above the action, shooting with his camera down. So he's shooting down from the helicopter. And there are three people in the helicopter. There's the pilot, there's Landis, the director, and then there's the director of photography. They're in this helicopter looking down and filming the action. And Landis is like, more explosions. There's not enough explosions, damn it. He radios the special effects guy on the ground. He says, make them bigger, make them bigger. And the special effects guy was like, it's dangerous to set off explosions near a helicopter that is in flight.
Well, and then how do you, I guess I'm just confused. How do you make explosions bigger if you didn't prepare for the explosions to be bigger? But continue. That's unimportant to the story.
No, a lot of it was that the special effects guy had purposely inhibited the explosions because he knew that a helicopter would be flying overhead.
Uh-huh.
And Landis wanted massive explosions. So they reset the explosives, but more kaboomy powder. Landis goes back up in the helicopter. This is all on film because it was caught from several different cameras. There was the camera in the helicopter, but then there was a camera on the ground taking the entire scene from ground level. And it's one of the most horrible things you'll ever see. A piece of shrapnel from one of the explosions hits the helicopter, and the helicopter spins down into the three actors, the adult carrying the two kids.
Oh my God.
They are simply pureed. It's instantaneous. If there's anything that could be said, it is that they didn't feel anything because it couldn't have been quicker.
Yeah.
That's a guillotine style beheading, basically.
Yeah, guillotine style beheading, and it was immediate. Nobody in the helicopter is injured. They climb out. And this became a massive story, and the LA district attorney brought a lot of charges against Landis and against several of the other people involved. And now Spielberg, even though Spielberg wasn't there on the set and had nothing to do with the decision about the explosion, but Spielberg did know about the miners working illegally and about the miners working around explosions. Spielberg fled the country. He went to whichever Asian, maybe it was Singapore, I don't remember, whichever Asian country where he shot Empire of the Sun, which was his next movie. He was like, you know what, I got to go to this country. I got to go shoot Empire.
I have somewhere else to be right now. I just got to be there right now. Yeah.
He avoided speaking to any of the prosecutors or any of the lawyers. He just fled under the excuse of he had to go shoot a movie in Asia. So he was AWOL for the whole thing. Meanwhile, Landis is facing murder charges, and the trial was a big news deal. I mean, a huge news deal. The LA district attorney at the time was a very unpleasant-looking woman named Leah D'Agostino. Her nickname was the Dragon Lady because she looked like this ugly caricature of a villain, like a female villain back in the 30s when white people would play Asians. And so if you were going to have this ugly old white woman play like, very interesting, now I will torture you.
Yeah.
She was just unpleasant. Meanwhile, Landis chose like a country western lawyer, like Matlock. Like, well, I'll tell you, I sure do love this great land of ours. Gives us justice, gives us food, and gives us God. And the distinction was so blatant between this unpleasant female prosecutor and this cowboy hat wearing, kindly white-haired country lawyer. So to begin with, you had that, but you also have the fact that nobody in the business, except for the helicopter pilot, nobody wanted to testify against Landis because they didn't want their career ruined by Spielberg. So it was hard to get witnesses to testify to anything. And the helicopter pilot who did testify, his career was ruined. He actually was blackballed because he testified.
Now, correct me on my legal proceedings here. If you're the helicopter pilot in this situation, can't you be forced to testify?
Well, you can always take the fifth. I mean, that is a constitutional right. Anybody can always take.
Right, but I mean, they can make you go on the stand, though, right?
Sure, but they can't make you answer questions. The helicopter pilot wanted to help. He actually cooperated with the prosecution because he felt very guilty, felt very bad about the fact that he was just following orders, going lower, going lower, going lower. And he did things that he realized were very unsafe. And but Landis, the director, had a reputation of being brutal. He was the kind of guy who, if he's shooting a group scene and one extra, it's one person playing a passerby or a crowd member, if one extra screws up, he would humiliate that person. He would yell at them. He would reduce them to tears. Landis was a terrible man. It is not for nothing that his son, Max Landis, is a rapist. Actually accused of what Whoopi Goldberg would call rape.
Thanks, Whoopi Goldberg. Yeah.
The Landises are not good people. And I knew John Landis. I knew they were using live ammo before it even got to the news because I had connections to that shoot, even though I was a teenager. Landis is not a good guy, and everyone who worked with him knows that he's a bully and he's just a general dick all around. But no one else would testify. And then Landis, who had just finished Trading Places, massive hit, starring Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd, Landis then had Eddie Murphy come by to talk as a character witness. Eddie Murphy was the biggest star in the entire world.
What's a character witness?
people who
this is an expert witness being like, I know about movie sets, so I can talk about moving sets like that.
Anytime the rule is, Dylan, anytime the prosecution opens up a line of attack, the defense is allowed to counter it. So once the prosecution opens up a line of attack on Landis's character.
Oh, that's what you meant by character. I'm sorry, I was thinking like character in a set. Not like Landis's. Okay, I'm with you now. I got it.
Witness
okay.
the man's character.
Yeah. Okay.
So
it's Eddie Murphy.
The biggest star in the entire world at that time comes by and he's like, here, John Landis is a great guy. He's never hurt anybody. And the jury was just so charmed. And then he had a couple of other older actors come by. Ralph Bellamy, who played one of the old millionaires in Trading Places, came by, and they were all talking about Landis, the greatest guy ever. And even though the evidence was really irrefutable, that Landis, at the very least, committed manslaughter, the jury acquitted everybody of everything. Everybody walked free. And in fact, Landis invited the entire jury to come to a premiere of his movie. And so they got their reward for letting him go free. The business, Hollywood, never penalized Landis because Trading Places, the movie that came out while this whole trial was going on, Trading Places made more money than any other comedy that year, and maybe any other film that year, but definitely any other comedy that year. Landis was red hot as a director. So even though all that, because you might say, okay, he got acquitted, that the system went through what it needed to do, but at least Hollywood can blackball the guy because 3 people are dead. But no, he continued to work. He did a whole bunch of big films after Trading Places, and then he worked with Eddie Murphy again in Coming to America, which was another big hit. And the funny thing is, Landis finally went too far on Coming to America when he was shooting that with Eddie Murphy, 88, I believe that was. There was a black woman playing one of the extras in the African Kingdom, and Landis did his whole yelling at her a bit because she messed up a cue. She messed up something. And Landis is berating her, and Murphy comes up and he's like, you better stop yelling at her. And he and Landis get into a shouting match, and Murphy apparently put Landis in a chokehold, and he passed out. And then he immediately gets up after a few seconds and starts crying and runs off.
You made me look bad. I'm supposed to be the big man. Yeah, okay.
And Eddie Murphy released a statement after that incident where he said, now Vic Morrow was the actor, the adult who was killed in the Twilight Zone tragedy. Eddie Murphy released a statement saying, John Landis has a better chance of working with Vic Morrow again than he does working with me. Now, as much as everybody laughed at that, but I remember thinking, wait a minute, that's you're now just discovering you don't want to work with this guy because he yelled at an extra
after you were the guy who stood up for him in the trial over the
people are dead.
Yeah.
So, but that's Hollywood's morals. You know, they kind of, Eddie Murphy was fine as long as his own ox wasn't gored, but when he felt disrespected on set, now it's the worst thing ever.
Mm-hmm.
Landis, fortunately, karma sometimes takes the long route getting somewhere, but Landis ended up having a series of bombs, and he lost all favor in the business. These days, he can't even direct traffic, and his son is a rapist, and it's not good times in the Landis household. I think all John Landis kind of does these days is he does intros for movies on AMC, where he talks about like his favorite films. But he had a good run for about a decade after the Twilight Zone incident. So he never got there was never really any justice. I mean, there were civil suits, of course, the Vietnamese parents.
Yeah, civil suit, you can write a check and then you're done, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's often what happens. Phil Spector would have loved to have been able to do that. If Phil Spector could have just written a check to the family of the woman whose face he blew off, he probably would have been very happy to do that. But the thing in Spector's case that ended up hanging him at the trial was his own words. I don't know if you know the backstory of the Phil Spector murder, but there was this beautiful blonde actress named Lana Clarkson. She was like 6 foot tall and stunning. I had met her a couple times. We weren't friends or anything, but we traveled in the same circles. And she was a low budget action film actress because of her height. At 6 foot tall, she played Amazon queen, barbarian queens, action heroines. And she had just turned 40, which is a death knell for an actress who has not yet made it big. If you're still doing low budget indie films and you turn 40, you're not going to get a big break at that point because the business considers you over the hill. So here she was working as the hostess at the House of Blues in Hollywood. And, it's a step down, obviously, when you've been in movies and now you're just a hostess at age 40, but it was work. But she still was looking for her break, and she was always working the town, trying to make connections, trying to get back in movies somehow. So Phil Spector had been out that whole night drinking at 5 different clubs. By the time he gets to the House of Blues, he's already very, very, very drunk, and he's being chauffeured around town by his driver, so that they pull up to the House of Blues. Phil Spector gets out. Now, he's known quite well at the House of Blues, and the manager of the House of Blues tells Lana Clarkson, be good to this guy. This is Phil Spector. He's like a multi-millionaire, and he's like the biggest music producer of his day, and he loves women, so be good to him. And, in her mind, she's kind of like, maybe this guy. She had no idea she was about to make the decision that would cost her life. Phil Spector comes in. Of course, he sees this 6 foot tall blonde. Doesn't matter to him that she's 40. He's much older, and 40 is fine for him. So he just starts hitting on her the whole night, and he's drinking more and drinking more. And he stays till closing time. And when it's closing time, he says, how'd you like to come back to my castle? He lived in an actual castle in Alhambra, part of like east of LA in the hills, and it was a house designed to look like a castle. So I says, well, you come back to my castle, I can play you some music. And in her mind, she's like, yes, maybe he'll fund my next movie or do something like that. Yeah, that's all, an actress like that at that age, that's all they're thinking of. So she gets in the limo, and the limo driver, who was a Brazilian guy who was not Spector's usual driver, which means he didn't have a loyalty to Spector like the usual guy would. So the Brazilian testified about everything. The Brazilian driver was like, Spector was just pawing all over her in the limo and like trying to just get all over her.
Right.
And they go back to the castle. The limo driver is sitting outside. He hears a gunshot. And then this is getting back to what hanged Spector at the trial. Spector, all of a sudden, his Woody Allen hue kicks in, and he comes running out of his castle saying, oi, I just shot somebody. Oi, I just killed somebody. Oi, my God, oi, what have I done? He says this. The driver hears it. The driver called 911, and when the cops and the ambulance get there, Spector is still so flustered, they have to tase him because he won't come. And the gun, and I shot him. And they literally have to zap him to get him to stop running around like some cartoon character from a Stryker cartoon. So they go in the castle, and they find there's Lana Clarkson. The entire lower half of her face is simply gone.
Yeah.
No jaw left, no teeth left. The teeth were all over the room. The teeth had been blown everywhere. It was a horrible, bloody mess. And what came out of the trial was that Phil Spector, when he would get drunk enough, he had this habit of demanding sex, and if the woman would say no, he would hold her at gunpoint. He did this and there were a half dozen other women who testified that he did this routinely. So apparently, once they got inside his castle,
that's called rape. Just for everybody, we kind of bounced around that word. That's called rape. Just wanted to make sure we're clear on that. Okay.
But apparently, in none of those other circumstances had the gun discharged. So in this particular case, apparently they go inside, and she doesn't want to have sex, at least not immediately, and he wants it immediately, so he pulls out his gun, and and it goes off. Nobody claims that it was premeditated, intentional, but he pointed at her. He pulled the trigger, and he pointed it at her with the desire to coerce her to have sex. The forensic evidence, everything, the Spector's own words, and he tried to come up with two different defenses. Neither of them worked. His first defense was that she was depressed about her career. She found his gun in a drawer and then killed herself. There are so many things wrong with that story that it's really impossible to begin. Number one, she had no idea he had a gun, so why would she go looking for a gun in a stranger's house that she's never been to?
I just got to this castle with this guy who might promote my career. I'm so depressed.
Yeah. And that was the other thing, because her agent, her family, they presented evidence that she was actually pursuing a lot of projects very aggressively. She was not on medication. She had not given up on life. So that the random stranger's house suicide thing, plus, the way she would have had to point, nobody, when you're going to shoot, there's certain places you point to, but you don't normally blow your teeth off. You don't normally do that. So Spector had to later come up with a second defense, which is he pulled out his gun, but then she wanted to perform fellatio on it. And so she decided...
Practice on this first.
And in the process of her performing, her going down on the gun, she grabbed his hand to bring the gun closer, and it made the gun go off. And that's why it was her jaw that got blown off. So, but that didn't work either. And Spector ended up, he got, what was, at his age, what amounted to a life sentence. And he died last year in prison. Right. So, but that was a case where it was mainly the testimony of the chauffeur. The chauffeur was found to be extremely credible. He had told the exact same story to police on the scene, and then he told the same story when being deposed, and he told the same story on the stand.
So basically the weakness was, like you just mentioned, that he didn't have a loyal person there, whereas when we compared to the previous one with the what was the name? Landis. Between him and Spielberg, they had control over everybody except the helicopter pilot who ate it afterwards. So that was the weak link for this other guy.
In fact, I just want one really quick thing to go back to the Landis thing, just to build on that point. There was a movie that came out in 1990 called Arachnophobia. It was a horror movie about giant spiders, and it starred John Goodman and a young actor, but I forget who. Anyway, Arachnophobia was a movie born out of the Twilight Zone trial because there was a guy who had to take the fall for Spielberg, one of those loyal people. Somebody had to take the fall for letting those minors on set at that hour. So there was a gentleman who basically said to Spielberg, I'll take the fall. I'll say that it all went through my desk, and I'm the one, and you didn't know anything about it. But in exchange, I want to direct a movie when this is all over. And so this fellow took the fall for Spielberg, got fined, got a whole bunch of sanctions against him. And then Spielberg gave him this movie, Arachnophobia, to direct. So the movie Arachnophobia was the reward for this guy for having thrown himself on his sword for Spielberg. So again,
this is so bizarre to me.
So going to the
interesting currency that they've developed in here.
Yeah, look, if you take the average person trying to make it big in Hollywood, and you say, take the fall and maybe spend 6 months in jail, 6 months in prison, or maybe get an ankle monitor for 2 years. But in exchange, you get to direct a big budget movie. And most people will say yes. They'll say, okay, where do I sign up for that? There's a certain amount of selling of the soul in this business.
Well, and I get that part. I guess the thing that it doesn't shock me, but it's very odd for me to behold is that there appears to be one person the souls are sold to. Do I have that wrong?
What you mean?
Steven Spielberg.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because when you're that powerful, Spielberg especially, I mean, he's been in his prime for decades, so he's not like Landis who had an up and down. A guy that powerful can command that kind of loyalty very easily because nobody wants to cross him. He does have the power to make or break careers. Now, he's one of those guys who, at the very least, it can be said of Spielberg that he never used that power to take advantage of women. He had one wife, then he got pissed off that she couldn't bear children, so he met a young actress and divorced the first wife and married the second. And she's still his wife. That second woman, Kate Capshaw, is still his wife. So the very least it can be said of Spielberg that he never did the casting couch thing. But he's corrupt in other ways. And the Twilight Zone murders, that's probably one of the most blatant examples of how a guy like that, who has almost godlike power in the business, how when something is screwed up, he can just find people who will throw themselves on their sword.
Right, because he has a certain currency that he could sell them. And what also bothers me about this is that Hollywood, as I mentioned at the beginning here, I'm not going to say that they're the culture creator, but they're the most significant or one of the most significant culture creators, not just in the United States, but the rest of the world. And so we see these movies, we see these actors and actresses, and we model our lives around them. Basically, particularly when you're young. I guess older people probably do this too, who never can detach themselves from the media. Is that I'm going to change the way I view the world based on what I'm seeing from these videos and from these movies. Well, they're all like you just said, deals with the devil, rapists blowing people's faces off, and I got to take you to fall the sword on me because I've done all this horrible stuff, and whether that's casting couch or raping women by pointing guns to their head. I mean, it's all that, and that pours into the this wonderful movie and entertainment that we receive and that we think about and we talk about and we review and blah, blah, blah. It just disgusts me. It's awful.
Yeah. The business is very forgiving if you're successful. Now, if you're not successful, if you're a filmmaker who isn't particularly big in terms of bringing in hits, the film business will jettison you if you prove to be a liability. So a lot of it really comes down to the bottom line figures, the numbers. I'll give you another example. Here's a case of someone who got away with it, but also kind of lost his career because he was already on the downturn. There was a writer-director named Eric Red. That was not his real name. His real name was Eric Durdeville, but he went by Eric Red. Eric Red had a couple of very successful horror movies in the 80s. Probably the most well-known one was a movie called The Hitcher, starring Rutger Hauer. And it was a horror movie about an evil hitchhiker who targets people on the road and torments them and kills them. All of Eric Red's movies shared a single theme: people killing people with cars or trucks.
Mm-hmm.
There's a scene in The Hitcher where Jennifer Jason Leigh, ironically the daughter of Vic Morrow, the guy who got decapitated in Twilight Zone, Jennifer Jason Leigh, her character, is tied between two trucks and torn apart. very graphic scene in the movie. And so in all of Eric Red's movies, there are scenes of cars or trucks running people over, crushing them, tearing them apart, etc. In the early 2000s, Eric Red was driving down Wilshire Boulevard, as Nima knows, probably the biggest east-west thoroughfare that we have. And he's on the west side of LA, near Brentwood. He's driving down Westwood Boulevard. He's in his big SUV. He's in a big, heavy SUV. He smashes into the car in front of him. The car is stopped at a stoplight. This is the Wilshire, fairly close to Sawtell. He smashes into the car in front of him. The drive, not hard enough to injure the guy, but the guy in the car gets out. He'd be like, the fuck? And Red is he's just in a daze. He backs up and smashes into the car again. Backs up and smashes into the car again. Well, now the guy who got out of the car is like, fuck this. I'm gonna go call the cops. I'm not. And
right.
He runs. Red then, in the middle of Wilshire, turns his SUV around to face a pool hall and bar, an upscale bar called Q's, like a pool cue. Q's was a place I used to go to all the time because my evil ex, Rosie, lived right across the street in one of the condos. He turns his SUV around in the middle of the street to face Q's, which had a big window wall. It was a big open, bright bar, and it had outdoor seating. And inside you had a bar, and you had different pool rooms. And the people who were drinking outside, they're like, huh.
Car's facing us.
Accident.
Yeah.
And now the guy's facing us, and he floors it. He runs over the outdoor seating, through the windowed wall, the front of the bar, smashes everything in his path, pins a bunch of people against the bar inside. I mean, he's in the bar now. He's driven into the bar, and he's now smashing people up against the bar itself. And then he gets out. He's like, he's got this. Everyone described him as looking at some hypnotic monster. And he kind of looks around at what he's done. And then he kind of half-heartedly takes a piece of broken glass and pretends to cut his wrist. But he doesn't. And meanwhile, the people, they restrain him at that point and they hold him down for the cops. Now, they did a toxicology on him. He didn't have anything in his system. He was not on drugs.
I was going to say, isn't this a cocaine's a hell of a drug moment?
Yeah. There was nothing in his system. 2 people died. About 10 people were crushed, but 2 of them died. So there are 2 dead people inside the bar who got pinned between the truck and the bar. His defense was that he had a kind of psychic blackout, like that I don't know what happened. One day I'm driving, next time I'm walking around in a bar and there's dead people. But he had at that time enough connections in the business that the district attorney actually decided not to prosecute for anything. He walked away from that
without even a trial.
Bizarre. The victims' families were furious, and there was some very good reporting that was done in the LA Weekly, the free weekly newspaper at the time. There was some really good reporting on this case about how Red had been working on a scene in a movie about someone doing this. This guy had a weird fetish, a sexual fetish of people getting run over, and he'd always wanted to do it. It just seemed like it was one of those things. He had been writing about it for so many years and probably getting off on it. He would probably write these scenes about cars running over people and crushing them, and he would probably get off on it when he would see it being filmed. And he just finally, he
wanted to live it out.
He wanted to live it out. It's like, that's why with pedophiles, once they start fantasizing about doing certain stuff, almost always they will eventually want to do it. because of it. It's just a draw with these people who have sick fantasies. They can't just keep thinking about it. So all the evidence pointed to the fact that he just kind of snapped and wanted to do this thing and crush people with his car like he always had done. But he had not had a big hit in several years, so for a while he was unemployable. Yes, he didn't get charged with anything, and yeah, he got away with everything scot-free. And yeah, there were civil suits, but he claimed poverty. You can't get blood from a stone, so what can you do? Eventually, though, investors began putting money back in his work, and he started doing movies again that always involved people getting killed by cars.
And then, remind me, what year did he actually run over these people?
Early 2000s. I forget the exact
year.
Okay,
but that roughly puts it. Man, this is so
and
weird.
So now he gets funding for movies now, and in fact, they remade The Hitcher, his big hit from the 80s. They remade it a couple of years ago as a big budget film. He got a lot of money from that because he has the rights to it. So when they made the remake, and the families of the victims were infuriated. They were like, "Don't pay this guy anything. It's bad enough that he's never going to be called to account for killing 2 people and crippling several others, but don't pay him to remake one of his films." But they did. And he still writes scripts and gets funding for them.
He's still living out his car porn fetish today.
He is still living it out in movies. He is still writing screenplays that are basically showing people doing exactly what he did. So that's a case of somebody where there wasn't even a trial, where it didn't even go that far. The LA prosecutors decided they didn't even want to try it. So
he goes on to make more movies, which shows that he's probably happy about what he did.
Well, and these are the moral standards in Hollywood. Just to be clear, Hollywood that lectures us every day about which words we're allowed to use and what we're allowed to tweet and not. But on their own turf, they get away with literal murder. So I find that pretty interesting to point out.
Now, an example, a slightly more satisfying example of somebody who actually did go away for almost a year this was about 5 years ago. Do you guys, I know you're both young, but do you know who the Allman brothers are? They were a 1960s brother rock group, 2 brothers, Greg and Dwayne Allman, and they sort of originated Southern rock. I mean, you guys have heard of Lynyrd Skynyrd?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sweet Home Alabama. The Southern rock style was kind of pioneered by the Allman brothers. The Allman brothers were legendary. One of the 2 brothers, Dwayne Allman, died very young in a motorcycle accident, and his brother, Greg Allman, kept up with the band. And Greg Allman wrote a book, an autobiography. So about 5 years ago, an independent film maker, this is very similar to the Baldwin case. It was an indie film, not a student film. They decide to make a film about the Greg Allman autobiography. They're going to shoot it as a movie with an actor named William Hurt playing Greg Allman. So they get the rights to the book. And the director, who had done a couple of successful indie films, but again, this was an independent film, so it's very comparable to the Alec Baldwin movie. Also, because it was an indie film, they couldn't afford to shoot in LA and New York. So whereas the Baldwin film was shooting in New Mexico, the Allman Brothers movie, which was called Midnight Rider, was shooting in the South, I believe Georgia. Pretty sure it was Georgia. And there was a scene that called for the actor playing Greg Allman to wake up in a hospital bed on a train trellis in the middle of the day. It's a dream sequence. He's sick in the hospital, but he dreams that he's sitting in a hospital bed in the middle of a train trestle on train tracks over a river. Did I say trellis before? Because I meant trestle. It's still early in the day for me, guys. And so it was a silly scene. Just the director wanted to do something surrealistic. A guy in a hospital gown, in a hospital bed, on a train trestle over a river. And the thing is, though, because it's an indie film, they couldn't tell the railroads to stop running trains on that track.
Oh, my. I see where this is going.
You can do that if you're Spielberg. You can make one call to Amtrak and say, suspend rail service for 10 hours on this track. And they'll say, you bet, Mr. Spielberg. Oh, boy. Our fee for that is $100 million, but, that's fine. But if you're an indie filmmaker, you can't do that. So the director emailed. It wasn't Amtrak. It was whatever train company was servicing the freight lines in that part of the South, XKXW, XKSW, something like that. The director emailed the people who have oversight over those tracks. And he said, I'd like to reserve this track for a couple of hours. And they said, no, this is a freight line. We have freight trains that run on clockwork, and they got to get where they're going, and we're not going to hold them back just for your film crew. He wrote to them again. He said, please, I found the perfect train trestle, and it's on one of your freight lines, and I just want a couple hours to shoot on it, please. And they were like, no, absolutely not. We can't do it. I'm sorry. And they're like, I hope you find somewhere better. It sounds like a great film, but you can't use that particular section of track. So the director tells the cast and crew, we got permission. Yay. Now, none of them knew that he did not have permission. None of them would have gone along with this if they knew that a train could be coming at any sec. But they had been lied to by the director, and they trusted him. They made the mistake of trusting him. So they go to this train trestle that's it's high up over a river, and they go out to the middle of it, in between the two banks, the middle of this bridge, and they set up the actor in his hospital bed, and the cameras and the lights and the sound equipment, and there's about 14 people on the middle of this bridge, this train.
And then, quick question: is this a bridge over water or
over
not?
Water? Yeah,
oh, okay.
Bridge over water.
So theoretically, you could jump in and save yourself.
Yes, theoretically.
Okay, all right.
Which is why the death toll was not higher. But the thing that the director did that was especially underhanded, he did not put spotters up and down the line because he had told them that he had permission.
So what would you need a spotter for?
Spotters? Yeah. So there's a bend. No one can see the train until it's too late. And the conductor, this is a big, powerful freight train. These things don't stop on
you
time.
need like 20 football fields to stop one of the, right.
Yeah. So you see where this is going. They're shooting the scene, the cameras are rolling, and then all of a sudden around the bend, whoo, whoo, the train starts coming. The engineer is going nuts. He's blowing the shit out of this thing, but he knows he doesn't have time to stop. And the footage was captured from two cameras. It was captured from the people on the bridge, although they're carrying the cameras, trying to get them off the bridge. But also the train was equipped with a camera, like a dashboard cam. So this was all seen. Everyone's panicking. The actor jumps out of the hospital bed and runs for his life.
Good.
And people are either running to the banks or jumping in the river. But the female assistant camera operator, her name was Sarah Jones. She thought that she could squeeze herself in against like the railing because there seemed to be more than enough space where the train could pass and she could just sort of be up against.
And she got a physics
railing.
lesson, didn't she?
Well, here's what happened, and she didn't see this coming. Everyone panicked so much that they leave the fucking hospital bed on the tracks. So the train hits the hospital bed, which then hits her in her little hiding place, forces her under the train. She's creamed. And meanwhile, shrapnel from the exploding bed metal rods and things, hit several other crew members who had gotten to safety. One woman got like a rod right through her leg, right through her thigh. But Sarah Jones, the camera operator, was killed instantly. And now this went to, in this case, I believe Georgia, the prosecutors, they wanted to hit these people very hard. And they had a paper trail that was impossible to ignore. The director had asked for permission and had been denied twice. He had lied to the crew. He had lied to the cast. It turned out one of his co-producers knew about the lies. So two people, the director and the co-producer, were put on trial. The director got 2 years behind bars. He only had to serve 1 because that's how these things go in America these days, time off for good behavior. So he served 1 year. The producer got 2 years of house arrest and probation. And of course, there were civil suits aplenty. But at least in that case, the guy did go away and he's unemployable now. He's known as, he's the Midnight Rider murder guy. And what makes it, the really sad thing about it, Greg Allman, the rock legend, whose book was being filmed, he had nothing to do with the deaths, of course. He was not on set. He was not a producer. He's just a guy who wrote the book that they bought the rights to. But for him, this was going to be a big thing. Finally, his life story was going to be told. His book was going to be filmed. When he heard about the deaths, he asked the director, he said, don't do this movie anymore. I want to call it off. The director, and this is before the trial, the director was like, oh, no, I'm going to complete the movie. Mm-hmm. I bought the rights to your book and I'm going to complete it. And Greg Allman was like, no, man, it's not cool, dude. Everyone's going to associate my life story with someone being killed, man. And eventually, when the director went to jail, went to prison, the film was called off. But still, the poor guy whose book it was based on, they were still going to make that movie. And it killed him. And Greg Allman died last year. And he died never having seen his book made into a movie because of what happened.
Because of some one stupid decision like that, which, I mean, if I was going to make that decision, wouldn't you at least get the schedule from the train company? Yeah. Right? So, like, okay, we know around 2 a.m. That train's coming, so I got an hour here. Yeah. I mean, exactly. I'm just baffled.
But that's why, again, it's analogous to the Baldwin thing, because you have an indie film where people were probably half-assing a lot of stuff. This director just wanted to get in, get the shot, get out. He didn't take the time to plan anything. He didn't take the time to be responsible. And
I don't even care that we don't have permission. Let's just go. Yeah.
Right. And he thought it's called guerrilla style filmmaking. He thought he could do it guerrilla style, where you get in, you get the shot, you get out without having to get any rights to anything, any passes.
It's exciting. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things that got him at the trial, because he was recorded in his previous film bragging about how many risks he takes to get those guerrilla shots. And he was like, yeah, people might die, but we're going to get in, we're going to get out, and I'm not going to have to pay for any fees or licenses or anything. So he actually he had his previous film, he had almost gotten people killed. So he was the most unsympathetic defendant. And plus it was Georgia. Now that with the Baldwin film,
I wanted to bring it back to that. So we've been going for quite a while, and I want to wrap this up here at some point, but I do want to bring it back to the Alec Baldwin thing. So based on your obvious, what you call it, plethora of knowledge in this area, do you have any sort of predictions of what of how this Alec Baldwin thing will end?
Well, there are two things to consider. One is, just to briefly again bring up the Greg Allman film. Not only did Greg Allman, the guy whose book it was based on, not only did he want the movie to be discontinued, but so did the star, the actor who had been lying in the hospital bed and could have been killed himself. The first thing is whether the Baldwin film, is going to continue. Most people will probably say that it's in bad taste to finish the film.
But I mean, bad taste doesn't seem to be an issue here. We're talking about these people who murder people and get off free. Yeah.
It's going to probably come down to Baldwin because he is both the producer and the star. He's the one who's going to make the call whether to finish the film or whether not to finish the film. So that's the first thing. That's probably going to be decided fairly soon. The longer thing is about criminal charges. Somebody was criminally negligent, possibly 3 people were criminally negligent. But I don't know the state of what the DA's office is like in that part of New Mexico. I've only been to New Mexico to drive through it. I've never been there to stop. So I don't know anything about the lay of the land in terms of the politics of their DA's office. I don't know if they're going to be aggressive like the prosecutors in Georgia were, or if they're going to be retiring and scared like the prosecutors in LA have often been. We don't know that. Now, if the prosecutors in New Mexico are aggressive, then they may very well charge the armorer, the inexperienced female armorer, the assistant director, the DA, the AD, who handed the unchecked gun to Baldwin, and Baldwin, who accepted and fired the gun without having followed any of the procedures. If they're aggressive, they might go after all 3 of those people. The best prediction I can make is someone's going to be prosecuted. It could be as many as 3. It could just be 1. Baldwin has a big legal war chest. He's not a poor man. He's got a lot of money at his disposal. So you're going to see, just like with John Landis, he's going to bring in some countrified lawyer, somebody, maybe a Latino.
I was going to say, is Eddie Murphy going to make another appearance?
Yeah.
maybe he's going to sell some more banana color T-shirts that say "Hands Up, Don't Shoot" on them.
Yes. When you look back on it, because people have been posting this for the last week, Baldwin has tweeted so many things about people he doesn't like should die. MAGA people should die. Trump supporters should die. Republicans should die. I even remember back in the late 90s, Baldwin was on the Conan O'Brien show, and he made a literal specific death threat against Newt Gingrich, that Newt Gingrich should be taken out and shot.
Is this why the South Park creators bombed them in their movie?
Oh yeah, well they more than that, they killed him even more viscerally in Team America. Alec Baldwin is
I don't remember that part, but I believe it. Yeah.
So they hate Alec Baldwin. He's not. It's not just that he's politically a waste of space, but this is a guy who once beat up a photographer and called him faggot. But then he goes out and he attacks conservatives for being homophobes and racist. This is a guy who called his own little daughter a pig and left her the most disgusting voicemail message because something to do with she didn't want to be with daddy for like Daddy's Day. This is not a good guy, but he has a lot of money and he does have a lot of friends in the business. He has a lot of industry pals. So he's going to get the best legal team he can. He's going to get the absolute best representatives he could possibly get.
Does it mean Gloria Allred is going to represent him?
I haven't heard any of specifics, but she always likes to poke her nose into anything where she can get publicity. But so what you can see about the 3 people who could conceivably be charged, the armorer, the assistant director, and Baldwin. Baldwin's going to be the one with the most power. You guys might not know this also, and I haven't seen this come up, but one of the jobs of the assistant director, and this is just sort of well known in the business. You won't find this in any like guidebooks for Hollywood. It is just something that people in the business know. The assistant director's job is to take the fall if something goes wrong, so that the director does not get any flack. So it is the job of the...
So it's the job of the assistant director to have already sold his soul to even be on the set.
You have to be ready. You have to be ready to take the fall if something happens. So it is within the line of the pecking order in the business for an assistant director to take the brunt of the blame. It wouldn't surprise me if we see that assistant director at some point over the next month or two.
It was my fault. I didn't check the something like that. Yeah.
Don't blame Alec, and don't blame the young woman. It was me, and by God, I'll plead guilty, and I'll do 6 months, and then you'll see.
And then he'll have a movie afterward, right?
Yeah. So keep that in mind as we see things unfold. That the assistant director's job is always to take the flak, and we may see that unfold in this case.
So, I like to focus on, let's talk about information that we and listeners and anybody consuming this can take home and say, how can I improve myself with this? And I mean, this is a vague thing for me to say, but the only thing I can think of is stop watching this crap and supporting these people. I mean, do you guys think of anything better than that?
Well, not to be on the side of the devil on this one,
yeah.
But I do want to say, because I know so many people in the business, especially those below the line people, the overwhelming majority of them are very diligent. The overwhelming majority of the people who view Hollywood, I'm not talking about the pampered stars, I'm talking about the guys who put on their work clothes and go to work every day, and they get the thankless job. Their name is never in lights, but they're the ones who put the set together. They rig the electrics, they do all of that stuff. They're diligent. For the most part, these are good people. So when something like this happens, where you just had a very dysfunctional set, obviously a bad set being run by bad people who were careless and who just had reckless disregard for safety issues. The thing to remember, maybe this is to end on a kind of optimistic note, but the thing to remember is that these kind of instances are still few and far between, and that's mainly because you really do have a lot of very good, diligent people in the business who take their job very seriously and who don't allow. I mean, I've told you, as I said earlier, all my friends are actors, and they the last week we've just been sharing stories about all the times that they have done movies or TV shows where they've had to handle guns, and they all have positive stories about how the armorer is so diligent with them, and everything goes perfectly and flows perfectly, and nobody gets hurt. So it is important to remember that these below the line people, they're just working stiffs, and they're trying to do their job as best as possible. A lot of these things can just be traced to that. It's that whole the fish rotting from the head down thing.
And then I was definitely referring to the top echelon here when I mentioned that. Yeah. How hard is it? So it's not that Hollywood has a monopoly, but they kind of have a monopoly over this aspect of the entertainment industry, right? How hard is it for other organizations or other groups to just start making their own movies and producing it that way? I mean, how hard is it to take all these hardworking people and say, we will treat you better over here? We're not going to rape and murder everybody. I mean, I know you just said that the murders were rare, but it sounds like the rapes aren't so rare. And make better quality movies. Like, is that possible? Does Steven Spielberg have like a legion of demons that prevents that from happening? What?
Well, we're just talking about independent films, and they have a lot. In fact, the Baldwin film was an independent film in that it's not associated with a major studio. Mm-hmm. Streaming has made it very easy for independent filmmakers to produce something and to get it shown and to get it seen. But it's hard to make an indie film. You either have to have an amazingly good idea. You have to be the Blair Witch Project. And that's the best example of an indie film that did everything right. They had no money, but they had a rock solid concept. They had no stars. They had no name value at all. But they had a concept that was so strong, they make their film altogether for about $30,000. That was the entire original budget of the Blair Witch Project, it is now made over 200 or 300 million. So when you're talking about risk and return, 30 grand returning 200 million, that's an investment that I think even Nima would be proud of. I know that Nima has the mind for investing that I don't, and I think Nima would agree. 30 grand.
Yeah, I think that return is
pretty
somewhere
good
in the Bitcoin, in the Bitcoin ballpark.
Yeah. So you either have to have a strong concept like Blair Witch, or you have to have a name, an actor. This movie that Baldwin was producing had him as the star. And that's why, if it had been completed, if this hadn't happened and the movie gets completed and it goes to Netflix or Hulu or wherever, it would be promoted because it has Alec Baldwin as the star. So if you're doing an indie film and you don't have the greatest concept in the world, you don't have the Blair Witch Project, then you have to bring in somebody from Hollywood who has a little bit of a name recognition, a little bit of a name pull. So that's why even when you're doing an indie film, you do, to an extent, have to bring in somebody from the business, somebody who has name recognition. You certainly need to bring in these crew members, the really good ones, because they're union, they don't work cheap. I'm not denigrating them for that. They work, they make what they feel they're worth, and the ones who are very good at it are certainly worth that. But a lot of times, these union crews are outside of the reach of a smaller independent film. So you have to end up going non-union, just if you're going to be able to fit your budget. Actors are the only thing where you can get good ones non-union. I mean, here in LA, I could reach my hand out my window and I'll grab somebody who's an actor who's non-union, but they're good. You don't have to be good to be an actor out here, but if the people who are good can be union, they can be non-union. But if you're going to deal like camera operators, sound people, you want people who really know their business. You want people who are who make the set easy on you because they know what they're doing. And that is the fatal flaw of what happened on the Baldwin film. The people who you're supposed to rely on to know what they're doing didn't. The armorer is supposed to know what they're doing so that you don't have to worry about it. So that if you're the producer, you don't have to be micromanaging them because you know that your armorer is on top of it. That's how it is supposed to go. When a stunt happens, your stunt people are supposed to know what they're doing so that somebody doesn't break their neck. The producer can't always be micromanaging this stuff. And what the breakdown that happened on the Baldwin movie is that a couple of people who knew what they were supposed to be doing didn't do it. And there was nobody micromanaging them at the top to make sure they did it. These breakdowns usually happen when you have an inexperienced crew and you have someone at the top who is not on top of what's happening.
Well, that was a significant string of stories, David, that were fascinating, and I appreciate it. Like I said, we're well into. I don't know how long have been doing this. I don't have a clock in front of me, but I do want to wrap up. But before we left, I did want to give you a chance to plug anything that you might want to plug.
Well, the most important thing for me always is my column, talkiesmagazine.com. My column comes out Monday nights, Tuesday morning.
Well, actually, the URL is talkiemag.com, right?
Talkiemag, yeah. Thank you. Nima knows my own work better than I do.
Yeah.
What the hell?
Well, you don't need to go to the website. You wrote it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't visit my own website, so I guess. But yeah, talkiemag.com. And my column comes out depending on your time zone, either late Monday night, early Tuesday. It's always up all day on Tuesday. And it's a different topic every week. Coming this January, it'll be 7 years I've been doing this weekly column. So that's quite a bit of verbiage, 7 years once a week. And I have a little part in another column that comes out on Sundays. So technically 2 columns a week, but talkiemag.com is where you can find the writings of David Cole. And there are several well-known David Coles. Probably the most well-known one, apart from me, is the guy who currently runs the ACLU. So when people Google search for me, I always say just search David Cole Holocaust. And if you're searching for the other guy, say David Cole ACLU. That other David Cole, by the way, he's got curly hair, he's got glasses, he's got facial hair, and he's Jewish. So people will even see pictures of him and think that I'm the ACLU guy or vice versa. But to my credit, I was famous as David Cole a good decade and a half before he was. So he's, even though he's older than me by a good 10 years, I'm the better David Cole. The only other well-known David Cole was, there was a group in the early 90s, a music group called C&C Music Factory. They had one big hit, Everybody Dance Now.
Oh, yeah.
Boom, 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 boom. Well, the C and the C stood for Clavales and Cole. The other C was David Cole. He was this light-skinned gay black guy who died of AIDS in 1995. There will be people on Twitter who will think that's me if they've never seen my face, and they will run a picture of this gay, light-skinned black man from the 90s, and they'll say, this is the guy who did the Holocaust work. Look at him. Oh, I heard he died of AIDS in 1995. So I am not the David Cole who died of AIDS in 95. I am not a light-skinned black man. I do not dance. I do not sing. And I don't run the ACLU.
What about your book? Do you want to plug your book as well, David?
Well, problem is, I'd love to. My book, which came out in 2014, is called Republican Party Animal, was published by a company called Feral House. The problem is that it's banned currently. Earlier this year, this sitcom star, Deborah Messing, who was a star of a show called Will and Grace, Deborah Messing pressured Amazon to drop the book. You can't even sell used copies anymore on there. So the book is almost impossible to find.
Yeah.
Well,
so those are the editorial standards at Amazon, by the way. If some actress is angry about the work, then it's entirely banned from the entire platform globally.
That's the way to do it.
Up there, yeah. The book had been up there since 2014, not harming anyone, getting a lot of rave.
And let me guess, has Deborah Messing read a page of this book? Or,
nope,
probably
not a page. Not a page. She just got to be in her bonnet around February this year. That how dare Amazon sell it?
Well, she's got to ban it in case she might read it, right?
Yeah, well,
take yourself from it.
So at some point, I wanted to come out with a second edition of the book because the book is from 2014 and it needs to be updated. But if you're banned from Amazon, self-publishing is not that good an option because most self-publishers can only make a living at it because they have Amazon to sell through. So I don't know what I'm going to do. The copies of the book, I had Ann Coulter ask me if I had a few spare copies just last week, and I've never said no to Ann in my life. She's a good friend. But I have to say, these copies are like gold.
They're going for hundreds of, like $500 now on Amazon. I think.
So
that might be another conversation that we can have in private about how to overcome that, because that touches on something that Nima and I have discussed in private as well.
Sure.
Which is how to start having an outlet for banned reading material if Amazon won't host it. But with that, so Republican Party Animal, if you could find it for $500 used, and TalkieMag.com. And thank you very much, David. I'm sure we'll have you back on. And that was a enlightening and entertaining series of stories, and we really appreciate it.
Gentlemen, it has been a great pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.